Okay, my name is Andy Hagedorn, and I am an institutional review specialist. I work in the department in federal student aid in Washington, D.C. And today I'm going to discuss satisfactory academic progress. And my colleague, Carla Johnson, is going to wave here. Wave, Carla.
Hi.
Carla's going to take the second half of the presentation and discuss the return of Title IV funds process. So we'll split this up. I kind of want to make this a working presentation, so I need to kind of get a little bit of background of who we have in the room. So how many of you are kind of brand new to this? You don't know much about the SAP process? And how many of you are pros? Okay. If you see a pro that raises their hands, you're going to go introduce yourself, and they will help you as well. There are 6 of us that work on the foreign schools team that review applications, and what we're finding is for several of the policies that we review, the satisfactory academic progress, that we're finding some errors. So I want to go through some basic things, and some of you I've emailed and had discussions with, and we can talk one-on-one about that as well. But for some reason, this happens to be a really confusing policy process. So I hope to just give you the basics, and then we can sort of expand on some of the unique aspects of your situation. But I want to just sort of give you an overview. So this is what we're going to cover today in my section. We'll talk about the qualitative and quantitative components. I always get those confused, but I'll explain that in a moment. What financial aid warning and probation actually means, and the appeals process. So there's a whole step-by-step approach that I hope to make this a little bit smoother for you. Then Carla's going to give some general information about the R2-T4 process, and she's going to give you some homework. So we're going to do some case studies and walk through the actual R2-T4. So at some point, everybody will need a pen. We'll get that. We've got a bunch of them up here if you haven't gotten one, but you actually get to walk through the process. And so I want to welcome you. Just to give you a little background, I've been working in the department for a little over almost 4 years, and I've been working in financial aid since 1995. So I've been in your shoes. I know the pain that you suffer sometimes trying to figure out what the rules and regulations are. There's some good news. The SAP process hasn't changed since 2011, so some of this you can go back and look at older presentations. You'll see some information that, it'll be the same. So, but when you're putting together a SAP policy, I see a few different issues. One is there's confusion. There's actually 2 policies. So you have an institutional satisfactory academic progress policy, but you also need a separate policy. This will be your financial aid SAP policy. So everybody's clear. When we request a recertification paperwork, we're going to ask for 2 policies: your institutional SAP policy and your financial aid or Title IV SAP policy. So make sure you have 2 policies. That's always a confusing one. Sometimes everybody thinks they can just use their institutional one, but they're actually different. So the policies, in order to be what the department considers reasonable, means that they have a qualitative and a quantitative approach. You have to cover both of those, and I'll go through that in just a minute. But your SAP policy for your Title IV students has to be as strict or stricter than your institutional policy. So it's not based on the frequency of how often you look at your institutional policy, because that can be different. But the actual, how strict you're giving this in the quantitative and qualitative piece has to be applied the same. It's got to be as strict or stricter. Okay. Another issue is when do you check SAP? So SAP is actually going to be monitored at the end of payment periods, and we'll go through how often you have to do that. But always at the end of a payment period, so when grades are posted, basically. So it has to be reasonable, has to be consistently applied to students, but it will be different, for example, probably for some of your undergraduates versus some of your graduate students. Okay. You also have to basically explain this in detail to students, and so I recommend having your policy available on your website, because at some point a student's going to challenge you. And if your policy's not right, they're going to go and read the Federal Student Aid Handbook, and then they're going to become the financial aid expert for a few minutes. I've seen it happen. Has that ever happened to anyone? You've had an expert student? Yeah. So unfortunately, that's why we have the policies in place, is to prevent any problems from happening. But it has to be well documented, and so you want to list all of the information on your website, make it clear so the students understand the whole process and what they need to do if they lose eligibility and how they can regain it. So SAP can be checked each payment period, or it can be checked annually. And there's a difference in the process there, how frequently you monitor academic SAP versus Title IV SAP. And so there's all these little differences, I guess I should say. So if you have a program that is a year in length or less, you have to monitor SAP each payment period. If you have a program that's, say, a bachelor's degree that's 4 years, then you can actually do it annually. So it's up to you. And this is only Title IV checking. This is not your institutional policy, right? So it can be different. And of course, you can have different SAP standards based on if the student's full-time or part-time, if they're an undergrad or graduate. But you have to tell them what what the policy is and how it is going to impact them. So we have these confusing words, qualitative and quantitative. It's very simple, though. The qualitative is what we consider a GPA, and so some of you I know use some different measures, but for us it would be a 2.0 GPA, so I think that will be for several of you as well, which is the minimum grade point average that a student needs to complete their degree. But it also can be other things. So some of you use the ECTS, some of you use numbering systems, some of you use percentages. So it depends, okay? So whatever your grading policy is, you just use the equivalent to whatever the minimum standard is, okay? So it can translate into other norms. So the quantitative, though, is the timing. And so it deals with a couple of things. First, here on the next page is pace, but it also deals with something we call maximum time frame. So when you're looking at your SAP policy, every term or every time that you check Title IV SAP, you're going to look for both things. You've got to look at the qualitative, the grades, and the quantitative, which is the pace of completion. Okay. So I want to go back up here for a minute. I want to go through a quick calculation for you. You guys can use this, get your pencils out. I'll also have this recorded so we can define how do we determine how to calculate the pace and the maximum time frame. They're actually connected. So it's kind of interesting. You can figure out what your pace is by defining how you're calculating your maximum time frame. So for undergraduates, they are eligible for 150% of the published length of the program in credit hours, okay? So sometimes I'll see, this is another area of confusion, is that people will put the number of years as a maximum time frame. So for example, if you have a 4-year program, your SAP policy will say the maximum time frame is 6 years. Okay, you can't do that. It's got to be in credit hours. So I'll give you an example. If you had what I would consider here a standard undergraduate degree program, this is calculating a PACE, okay, which is the quantitative piece. If you had a 120 credit hour program, that works out to 15 credits a semester for 4 years, okay? So if you have 120 credit hours in your degree program, your maximum time frame would be 150% of that, okay? So that works out to be 180 credit hours. Everybody got that? So if you take the 120 credit hours and divide it by the 180, you get 0.666, which equals 67%. That's your pace of completion. See how cool that is? It's magic. Yeah, absolutely. So when you're calculating the pace of completion, which is what percentage of the courses attempted that the student needs to complete in order to get the degree before timing out, which is the maximum time frame, which means at that point they're losing eligibility for federal aid. You have to figure out what percentage is the minimum that they have to complete each term. So in this example, and you can adjust this based on how your terms work and the number of units in your courses and what you define as an academic year. But if you have 120 credits, and the reason I came up with that number is 15 credits per term, so you have 2 semesters a year, it'd be 30 credits a year times 4, 120 credits. Multiply that by 150%. That's 180 credits. This is a typical undergraduate discussion, by the way. So 180 credits is the maximum number that the student can take and still receive financial aid. That's the maximum time frame. Okay? But the pace of completion, you take 120, okay, which is the credit hours and the number of hours in the program, and you divide it by 180. Okay? And it's 0.666, right? 67% rounded. So the student has to complete 67% of the courses attempted in order to get through without timing out. Does that make sense to everyone? Perfect.
Can we just say that you have to validate 2/3 of all the credits each term?
I'm sorry, say your question again?
Can't we just say that we have to validate 2/3 of the credit each semester, each term, so that we basically tax individual credits without the...
I still didn't hear the first part of your question.
Can't we just say that the students have to validate 2/3 of their intended credits each term?
2 what? 2/3, I'm sorry. See, this is what happens when you grow up in Oregon. You figure it out through the pace of completion, and that it's roughly, it almost always is going to be 2/3, yeah. But it may not be. So it depends on how your academic calendar is set up, how many credits are in your system. You may not use term-based credits. You may be in modules. You may be in clock hours. So the department has thought of everything. So, but that, to answer your question, usually it is. Yeah, usually it's 2/3. So everybody understands the pace of completion, how that is married into the maximum time frame? No? Who's confused? Question? No, you can't do that because the first thing that we talked about, the question was if your institutional policy is more strict than that, what do we do? So where is it at? Well, maybe I didn't write it up here, but the Title IV policy has to be as strict or stricter, okay? So you're going to have to figure out, in a case where the situation where your institutional policy is more strict than what I just mentioned, then you're going to have to use that as your baseline. Okay. So every student has a maximum time frame. They got a grade point average that they have to meet every time you're checking SAP, and they have to complete this pace. And if they don't meet one of those, then things start to happen that are not good. Right? Is that clear to everyone? I know I had a couple of other hands come up here. We can talk about it offline too. So it's a calculation.
Excuse me. Question. In your policy, in your handbook, you can't state it in years. You must state it in the
Yes.
calculation that you stated. For ours, it's 6 years.
Yes, so the question is can you state it in years? And it has to be in credit hours. Has to be in credit hours, yeah. Because it depends on if a student also, how many units they're taking, if they're half-time, if they're three-quarter time, if they're full-time. It could take them, 8 years if they were going part-time. And that would not meet the definition of maximum time frame. So there's a few other things that you'll have to consider that are generally in your policy. The first is how you're going to handle students that have incomplete grades. You'll have to deal with withdrawals, repetitions, and transfer students. So we're very specific, though, on credits that are accepted from another institution, so transfer credits in. They have to be counted as attempted and completed courses. Okay, so this is where it gets fun.
Until end of the.
Well, I want to keep going along, but yeah, sure.
Can we ask a question?
Sure.
Yeah, if a student changes the major and the program changes, we should use the 150% on the new program?
Well, you have to define that at your institution. So if they change a new program, that's up to you how you define it. But at some point, if they keep changing majors, you're going to have a problem too. So you need to have a policy regarding that.
Okay.
So if the student changes their major 6 times, they're going to be a lifetime student there. We don't want that. Okay, so this is an area of confusion, financial warning and probation, that I see frequently. So I want to try and see if I can describe this and how the process works. And I'll go back and forth on these slides a little bit. So basically what happens is your student is going along, and at some point they don't meet satisfactory academic progress. Their grades drop below 2.0. These are cumulative, by the way. Okay, it's not by term. It has to be all cumulative. So if your cumulative GPA at the end of, let's say, your second semester is 1.9, but you're meeting the pace of completion, but you just failed the courses, okay? That means that you are now not making satisfactory academic progress for Title IV purposes. Okay, we'll assume that this is as strict as your institutional process as well. So then you have some choices, okay? So it also depends on how frequently you are monitoring Title IV SAP. So how many of you, I guess, that have some experience, how many of you are monitoring by term? Okay, is anybody monitoring annually? A few of you. Okay, so there's a little bit of a split here. So there's a difference. So we're going to go through the schools that monitor by term. Okay, so if you monitor by term, you have the option of including something called financial warning. So what happens is at the end of the term where the student becomes ineligible, they lose their, they're not making SAP. The next term, if you decide to include a financial warning, okay, it's an automatic. They automatically go on warning, and they go on warning for one payment period only. Okay. At the end of that payment period, you have to check again. And at that point, you're going to have 2 choices, right? They either made SAP or they didn't. If they made SAP, great. They're back on track again. That's perfect. If they didn't make SAP, then they're going to roll into the next step, probation, okay? But can't get to probation automatically. This is not an automatic. What do you have to do to get to probation? You have to file an appeal. Okay? So before I go through all these slides and confuse you, here it goes. Lose eligibility, warning for 1 period. If they still aren't making SAP, then they lose it. You can say basically they've lost eligibility, but they have the right to appeal. If the appeal is denied, they lose eligibility. If the appeal is approved, then they go on probation for 1 term, 1 payment period only. I'll go over that. Yeah. So I just want to get this so you understand. But you can't do this if you check. You can't use warning if you check annually. Okay. This is only by payment period. Okay. So is that clear to everyone how that process works? Automatically, you lose eligibility. You go on warning automatically. If you still aren't making SAP, you have to appeal. Okay. And that's up to the student. They may not want to appeal. If they don't appeal, then they lose eligibility until they regain it again. Okay, until the next term or how long ever it takes. But if they appeal, then they go on probation. Okay, probation only lasts for 1 term. After probation, then if they're still not making SAP, they lose eligibility. Okay, if they make SAP, great. Okay, so the other issue is, hang on a second, I'm not done. If we go into annual, if we're just looking annually, you can't use warning. So here's how it goes. Student loses eligibility at the end of year 1, they're not making SAP, let's say their GPA is 1.9. At that point, they lose eligibility. Okay? If you have, the next step is you have to define how they regain eligibility. So at that point, you take out the warning and just roll in probation. So they can appeal. This is what happened to me. And then, if you approve the appeal, they can go on probation for one payment period only. Okay? If they make it after that, great. If they don't, they lose eligibility. So I'll go into academic plans in just a minute. So let's talk about the, before I get into the appeals, I'm going to go down to the appeal process after probation. So this works for both setups, whether you're by payment period or annually. You go through, the student loses eligibility. And then you either have warning or probation, but they, after they've appealed. So there's two things you can do at the appeal standpoint. Okay, you can either give them probation for how long? One payment period only, or you can do something called an academic plan, which can be more than one payment period. It can be as long as you want. That's up to your institution to decide. Okay, so you can give the student a lot of flexibility. It's up to you how you do this. I would just caution you after doing this, seeing this myself, don't give them too much rope. Right? If you give them too much time, if you know they're never going to make it, right, you need to have some sort of discussion about how long you're going to give these schools or students if you give them an academic plan. Because if it's going to take them, for example, more than 2 payment periods, if it's going to take them a year to get to SAP, that's going to be concerning. Okay, so you have some issues there. So in the appeal process, let me talk about this a little bit. Who's going to be on the appeal committee? Well, you get to decide that. Okay, so it's up to your institution who's on the appeal committee. I would recommend you, being the financial aid administrator, to be integrally involved in this. Okay, so I would recommend that you are the lead person on this. Okay, you also are going to need your academic folks involved. Okay, so an academic, advisor or registrar or somebody like that. You can define the committee. It can be you too. You can be the committee. Okay, and you determine the appeals. So once that happens, once the appeal happens, you're it. You're the final say. So the student cannot appeal your decision. You are the all-powerful one at this point. Okay, nobody can ask the president. Nobody can ask the board of trustees, the chancellor. You're the financial aid god. Okay, so this is the one time where you have all the power in the world. So you're the appeal committee. Nobody else can challenge your decision. They can call us, and we will say, you got to deal with the school. Okay, so that is your prerogative. It can be your committee, but the decision cannot be appealed. Okay, so at this point, we've gone through the process. We have warning or probation. We have the appeals set up, and then we have 2 choices. Either do probation for how long? 1 term only, or an academic plan for how long? As long as you want, right? It's up to the institution to make that decision. Okay? Questions on that piece?
So if you know it's going to take them 3 semesters to get up to what your standards are, what should their status be for those 3 semesters?
So they're actually eligible. So the question is if you put them on an academic plan and you think it's going to take them 3 terms to do that, and that's how your institution has given that much flexibility, and you have to write this up in your process, then they're eligible. But you have to check the progress. So every term you need to check what's going on. So even the fact that you have probation is 1 term, you have to check after probation. You have to check after warning. You have to check after each term, make sure that they're still making this progress, but they're still eligible.
I think his question is, what is the student's status? It will be FA probation.
That's correct. They will only be on probation for 1 semester. That's the way the
programming says that they're on probation because that's the way the code is.
1 semester. That's what the regs say. So just for your internal purposes, just you let your folks know it would be an academic plan.
Just one question about the GPAs. Is that, I heard you say a cumulative GPA. So when you do the GPA, it's from the start of their program until, it's not just for that semester or that term?
Yeah, it's cumulative from
Yeah.
the time that they either transfer in or till they start the beginning of the program, their first term there.
Okay, and one other question. Will you be covering PhD students with this?
I'm sorry, say that again?
Will you be covering PhD students?
I don't have that specifically listed, but we can talk a little bit about PhD students. So PhD students are unique in the sense they usually have courses first year or two, and then they have a dissertation, right, where they're not getting units. So at that point, you need to talk to their advisors, and usually do it on a termly basis to make sure they're making academic progress, because you don't have any grades, right? So at that point, you're just contacting the academic advisors. Now, another issue I've seen is that some schools are having students go directly to their advisors or their professors and getting their grades. That's not a good idea, okay? You need to coordinate all of this internally with again, this is the business office, the registrar, you, but all the academic information should be coming securely from whoever handles it, in your case, your registrar, all right? So you can't have the students go chasing down their grades and then handing them into you, because then they can change them. So everything needs to be safe and secure and handed directly in from the registrar's office on each termly basis. Question?
I have a question. You said the Title IV policy should be stricter than our institutional policies.
As strict or
Okay.
stricter.
Okay, so if our institutional policy, if a student has a GPA below 2, they lose eligibility for institutional aid. They could still benefit from loans, from the federal loans.
Say that again.
Our policy, if a student's GPA is below 2, they lose eligibility automatically for institutional financial aid.
Yeah,
Would
it's got to
they-
be this. It's got to be as strict. So
So
would
it
have
has
to
to
be
be
a
as
minimum.
strict, so they won't have
Yep.
one term of, okay.
Yeah. Well, these policies, I mean, warning and probation can all still be as we just discussed. But if your GPA is 1.6 as a minimum, you know, whatever that number is, you've got to use that as the baseline. Okay. Just want to move on for a couple more things so that I give Carla some time. You can't have 2 consecutive terms of warning or probation, but they can come back on again. So let's say that the student lost their SAP eligibility. They went through this process of either warning and or probation, and then they regained their eligibility. They can fall back into the SAP process again. Okay, so it can happen more than once. That's probably a red flag, but just so you know that is okay for that to happen. So I'll just leave with this. There's several different types of implementation questions for you to think about. You can do this differently. We've given you a lot of flexibility. Are you going to have a fixed standard? So are you going to say that the student needs to complete 67% of their courses each term, or is it graduated where they have to complete at least 30% one term and 90% the other? I mean, there's ways to do this that are different. I think it's just the KISS principle, keep it simple. So use whatever is the easiest for you to monitor this, because I think it can get confusing for a lot of folks. How are you going to handle your graduate students? How are you going to handle your undergraduate students? Are you going to do this by payment period? Are you going to do this annually? How are you going to treat your course incompletes? How are you going to treat your withdrawals? What happens if they repeat a course? How many times can they do that? Are you going to give them that eligibility, or is that going to count against them? And then we talked a little bit about transfer courses. Occasionally, some of you may have remedial courses that may allow them to finish their degrees, and so you can make a decision on how you handle those as well. Who's going to be the appeal process? Who's going to be on that committee? How will that work? One other thing that I also see is when I ask for the appeal process, it usually takes forever. So my advice is to make this as quick as possible, because what happens, you know, at the end of the term, the student's going to be given grades, and they may be, you know, I don't know how quickly grades will come out, or whatever, you know, the credits, whatever they're going to have in your grading policy. But if you give them some time to submit an appeal, and then they have to wait back for your response, you know, if you give them 2 weeks and then you get 2 weeks, I mean, they're already a month into the program for the next term, and their tuition was due the first day usually, right? So keep that in mind when you're developing your policy of how long you're going to have the appeal process, because if you make it too long, the student may withdraw. They may have a balance at that point because they're waiting for an answer. Okay, so that does happen occasionally, so I just want to give you just a little advice on that. You know, don't make it too long because the students are going to, you know, or the billing office will be knocking on your door wondering when the tuition's going to get paid, and you know you're still in your committee. So will you have an academic plan? If so, I mean, you're not required to do that, but if you do that, who's going to monitor that? How is it going to be developed? This all needs to be written up too, so the students see this on your website. How often you're going to review it, we talked about, and whether or not you're going to use these probation warning statuses. So after 20 years, you get good at this, but I'll tell you that the two things that I always go to look at are the Foreign School Handbook, which is on our website, and the FSA Handbook, which is Federal Student Aid Handbook, which is on IFAP, the Information for Financial Aid Professionals website. Okay, so Volume 1, Chapter 1 of the 16, 17, 17, 18, it's always the same, is going to be, there's a whole section on satisfactory academic progress. So I always encourage you to go here first, to start reading through the information. This is the operational guideline for all financial aid administrators, the FSA handbook, right? So check this piece out. This is where we're getting our information, right? No secrets. So you'll see the information that we discussed in there today. Also, there's some new information on the program integrity regulations, which talks a little bit more about SAP warning and probation, things like that. So these are all hot links you can go to and see them. The Code of Federal Regulations 66816, 66824 and 34 deal with satisfactory academic progress. So if you like to go and read the regulatory pieces, you can do that. There's an electronic version. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Carla because I don't want to take up too much time, and we can have time for questions afterwards as well.
All right. Okay. Thank you, Andy. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Carla Johnson. For this portion of our session, we will be discussing the return of Title IV funds, commonly known as the R2T4. I will walk you through how to complete a return of Title IV worksheet and define its elements. And then before the session ends, you will be performing your own calculation based on the two case studies that I've put together. The purpose for you, for your calculation is for us to be able to be around and answer your questions while you're performing your calculation. You should have a folder with you, and inside the folder is a return of Title IV worksheet. I also have the case study that I will distribute before we do their calculation, and we have pens that I held up front. If you do not have a pen, I will distribute it when it's time for you guys to perform the calculation. Let's begin by defining what is an R2T4. If I could have your attention to the slide. R2T4 is the calculation required when a recipient of Title IV aid withdraws from an institution during a payment period or period of enrollment in which the recipient began attendance. Keywords: began attendance and withdraws. You do not need to perform an R2T4 calculation unless your student began attendance and then withdrew in the middle of the payment period. For the purpose of Title IV, a student is not considered to be withdrawn unless he or she ceased attending your institution, meaning he dropped, withdrew and left your institution, or he withdrew 100% from all his Title IV eligible course for the payment period or period of enrollment in question, meaning Your student withdrew from all his eligible Title IV course and left with ineligible course, therefore, he is considered withdrawn. Ineligible course could be that course that he is auditing or that course that he's trying to complete because he previously received an incomplete grade, or that course that he's repeating right now for the second or third time. The purpose of the calculation is for you to identify what is earned, what is unearned, or if you have to offer post-withdrawal disbursement for your withdrawn student. Based on your calculation, if you disburse, if they earned less than what you've disbursed, then you have to return funds within 45 days. If they earned more than what you've disbursed, then you may have to offer post-withdrawal disbursement within 30 days from the date of determination, as long as they meet the conditions of late disbursements. R2T4 does not apply for your student who reduced his or her course load. If your student withdrew 1 class, 2 classes from his scheduled courses for the payment period, when he changed his credit from 15 credits to 9 credits, he's not withdrawn. He changed his enrollment status from full-time to part-time, is still attending, therefore you don't need to perform an R2T4 calculation for these students. For your students who've completed a payment period and then withdrew and did not register for the next payment period, they withdrew, correct, but you don't need to perform an R2T4 because they've completed the previous payment period before they withdrew. For your student who enrolled and they enrolled but did not commence attendance, these are what you normally call no-shows. They have not established eligibility for any Title IV funds that you've allocated for the payment period. Therefore, if you disburse funds towards the student's account, you have to return it all. This is now considered over award. Or if you disburse Title IV funds directly to the student or to the parent borrowers, then you need to contact the debt resolution services. That way they can start the collection process for you. Now let's talk about consumer information. Consumer information is not just for your current, or it also applies for your prospective students. Therefore, you need to publish your consumer information where both populations will be able to access them. If you have any refund policy in which your school must comply, coming from your country, your Department of Education, your quality assurance, accrediting agency for your programmatic or your institutional accreditation, you need to publish it not just for your current but also for your prospective students. Also, you need to publish your institutional refund policy. These are your general refund policy for your tuition schedule, for your tuition and fee schedule of refund. You need to publish them in your website. The third one, requirement for treatment of Title IV funds after withdrawal. This is very important. Once you make a determination that your student is withdrawn and you have a pending credit balance refund for this student, you need to hold issuing, your business office needs to hold not to issue those credit balance that are normally a requirement for your cash management to be issued for 14 days. hold them and start your calculation of R2T4. That 14 days is now reset to 14 days after you perform your calculation. Reason? You have to make sure those credit balance is earned before you issue them to your student. What's important there is your business office issued the credit balance refund. They should be aware that they need to hold those credit balance and let you perform the calculation first, because otherwise it's an over award, even though inadvertently that they did not know that your student is withdrawn. Your registrar office and your business office need to be communicating. Procedure for official withdrawal. Part of your return of Title IV policy, you should include a procedure that where your student can officially withdraw. Process where they have to, what form they need to complete, what office they need to go if they have the intention to withdraw from your institution. Now we'll start the calculation. There are two forms of worksheet, one for credit hours and one for clock hours. If you measure academic progress by credit hours, you use this form. If you measure academic progress by clock hours, there is another form that's for clock hours that you can download. Both can be downloaded from IFAP. Once your student withdraw, you perform this calculation. You enter the student name, the social security number, and enter the date form completed. This date form completed cannot be over 30 days from the date of determination. Reason? Because you have to offer post-withdrawal disbursement for your students within 30 days from the date of determination. Also from this date, you have 14 days to issue those credit balance refund. But you have to make sure those credit balance refund are earned before you let your business office issue those credit balance refund. Could be after you perform your calculation, you don't need to issue any credit balance for the students. School's date of determination, this is the date you found out your student is withdrawn. This triggers all your reporting requirement. 30 days from date of determination, you need to update NSLDS on the student's enrollment status. You have to change this enrollment status to withdrawn. 45 days from this date, you need to return Title IV funds. 45 days is not the day you return the money, it's the day that the department accepted the money, the refund. 30 days, you need to offer post-withdrawal disbursement. 180 days from this date, you can disburse any post-withdrawal disbursement, otherwise it's too late. Date of determination can be official withdrawal or unofficial. Official is when you found out your student, when the student informed you of their intention to withdraw. Unofficial is when you, the institution, made a determination that the student is withdrawn. For a school that is attendance taking, you have 14 days from the date of from the last day of attendance of a student to make a determination if your student has to continue or has to be withdrawn. This is in conjunction to your approved absences. And for a school that is not attendance taking, you have 30 days from the end of the payment period or 30 days from the period of enrollment or academic year, whichever comes first, to make a determination if your student is withdrawn. Payment period, this is your semester, trimester, quarters, your terms. Period of enrollment is a combination of that 2 semester, a combination of that 3 quarters. For a school that is standard term-based program, you can only use payment period as a basis for this calculation. If you are non-term or non-standard term, like your clock hours, you have a choice. You can use payment period or period of enrollment as a basis for your calculation. Step 1. This is where you identify your Title IV funds that you've allocated for your student for that payment period. This is what you package the student, assuming that they will complete that payment period. A and C does not apply to you guys. These are grants. B is Title IV funds net amount that you've disbursed to your student at that before they withdrew your institution. Disbursed and applied in your student account or disbursed directly to the students. In B, you also enter any credit balance you now are holding that you would issue within 14 days. D is net amount that could have been disbursed. For title, these are the funds that you've allocated for the payment period, but you were not able to disburse at the time the student withdrew. They can be added to this list as long as they meet the conditions of late disbursements. There are 3 conditions of late disbursements. 1, the SAR and ISER has to be valid and processed with an EFC, except if the loans are for plus loans. 2, the loans has to be originated. 3rd, the MPN has to be signed. The master promissory note has to be signed at the time you are calculating your R2T4. One important thing is a student can sign an MPN after they withdrew, but you cannot add that Title IV funds unless it's signed at the time you're performing your R2T4. So sometimes it's better, do you want to warn your student? Let them know that unless it's signed, you cannot include it as a post-withdrawal disbursement. So E is Title IV disbursed because there's no grants. B and E should be the same. These are the Title IV funds you've disbursed. G is a combination of net amount disbursed and amount that could have been disbursed. A total of could have been disbursed. Then again, a Title IV funds could be added as could have been disbursed, but really you cannot disburse them because it is the loans is your second disbursement or subsequent disbursement unless your student graduated or completed the loan period, or the student is on 30 days hold because he or she is a first-time borrower. Now, step 2, this is calculating the percentage of Title IV aid earned. Start date is the first day of that semester or payment period. Scheduled end date is the last day of the payment period or your semester. Date of withdrawal. Date of withdrawal for a school that is attendance taking should always be the last day of attendance coming from your attendance record. An institution is considered to be an attendance taking institution if you have an outside entity that requires that you need to comply, a requirement that you have to comply that can only be satisfied if you are attendance taking. Date of withdrawal for a school that is not attendance taking can be 50%, which is the midpoint of the payment period, or the last day of an academic-related activity. What the department considers academic-related activity could be the last day the student attended your institution, could be the last day he submitted the homework, or took an exam, or participated in a group study. What's not considered to be last day of an academic-related activity is the last day the student ate in your cafeteria plan, using your plan, stayed in your housing, or seek academic advising. For your student who doesn't return after 180 days from a leave of absence, you need to withdraw them. And if you are attendance taking, it's always the last day the student attended coming from your attendance record. If you're non-attendance taking, it will be the day that you approve the student to go on leave of absence. Unscheduled break. If a student needs to go on unscheduled break, you need to withdraw them for the payment period, unless you have an approved leave of absence. Approved leave of absence for financial aid is different from your academic leave of absence. For financial aid, you cannot have an approved leave of absence unless your student who goes on leave of absence can go back to the point that they left off academically, which is very unlikely if you are semester basis. More than likely it applies for clock hours. So if you do not have an approved leave of absence, it becomes an unscheduled break, therefore you need to withdraw that student. So now, age, we start calculating so we can get the earned percentage. Completed days, calculation of R2T4 is based on student sit time. So when completed days would be your numerator. If you have any scheduled break that is 5 days or more, you minus it from this 35. This becomes now 30. If you have another leave of absence on top of that scheduled break that is 5 days, you minus it again from your completed days. Completed days is from the start date, counting calendar's day to include Saturday and Sundays, up to the day the student withdraw. So the student completed 35, you divided it by the total numbers of days for your payment period equals the percentage that the student earned. If the percentage is greater than 60%, you enter 100%, not 60, but greater than 60%. And only for this calculation, rounding rules does not apply. So if the calculation says the student earned 60.001, it's 100% because it's over than 60. If it's 60%, then it's 60 because it's not over the 60. So based on this calculation, the student earned 31.8%. Now, step 3, what is the equivalent of 31.8%? You multiply it by Bax G, which is the total aid disbursed and could have been disbursed, equals $3,303.38. What does this mean? Based on the total disbursement, the student only earned $3,303.38, but you've disbursed $10,388. So the student, based on your disbursement, the student earned less than what you've disbursed. Am I over 5 minutes? Okay, that means you don't have to complete J. There is no post-withdrawal disbursement. Now, $10,388 that you've disbursed minus what's earned, $3,308.38, is equal to $7,084.62 that is unearned. This is the amount that that needs to be returned. Now, let's see which one is the student's responsibility. We have to, L, you have to enter the charges, institutional charges. This is in dollars. So based on your ledger card, could be your charges are in pesos or in Canadian. You need to convert them to US dollars. And if you are charging tuition up front, charging for the whole academic year, you have to prorate it based on payment period. So if you charge up front $15,000 for the whole year, because you're calculating for a payment period, you only enter $7,500. Also, you only enter academic-related charges, your admission fee, parking fees, all that's not academic-related, you cannot include it here. And you can only include initial charges, the charges that are there at the time your student withdrew. So if you decide to waive the charges or reduce the charges whenever your student withdrew, that's not the dollar amount, the tuition charge that you need to enter here. So based on this calculation, total charges is $17,000. 68.2 of that $17,000 is unearned. So this actually $11,594 is unearned. Because for the total amount for the school to refund, whichever is the lower amount between K and N is what you're going to return. Because the unearned is lesser than the unearned tuition charges, you need to enter the lesser amount, which is $7,084.62. And you need to return it to the order of unsub first, then sub, total dollar amount to return within 45 days in US dollars. And because COD doesn't only take dollar amount, you only return $7,084 with no cents. Do not return the cents. So $7,000 is unearned. The school is going to return $7,084.62 total to zero. So the student is only responsible for the 3,303.38 that is applied in your student's ledger that he will pay in accordance to his MPN. 9 and 10 is for grants. You don't have to you don't have to include it. Post-withdrawal disbursements. If your student earned less than what, if the student earned more than what you've disbursed, then you have to offer post-withdrawal disbursement within 30 days. 30 days from the date of the termination. When you send out these letters, you have to include the amount that you are offering as post-withdrawal disbursement. Then you have to include in your notification that they have the option to either confirm all or portion of that amount, and also you have to give them a notification that this money, advising them that this money are now loans. You give them 14 days to send a confirmation from the day that they received the letter. So this is, we have two, I don't know if we have time, but we have two case studies, huh?
Try one and let's see.
Try one? Okay, you have your return of Title IV worksheet. If you can start the calculation, the school profile is there. Cost of attendance profile, Title IV award profile. You have a question?
I had questions about R2T4 just recently. November 11th is a holiday in Canada. That's a holiday. And so our camp the
Very good. Are you guys seeing?
At this step, why don't you put here the amount that the student paid for, needed to pay for the tuition fee? If one stops, if the student stops on the 31st of October, then he only has to pay 2 months tuition fee and not the semester.
So when payment period, if for I, I can go.
I don't know what happened there. How are we doing, Carla?
Did anybody complete the calculation? No? You did?
No, but a question about, on the calculation sheet, because we're counting our institutional dollars in our own currency, we have to convert to US currency there. Which exchange rate do you use?
Good question. Her question is, on the tuition charges, because you're calculating in your currency at this point, you need to convert it to US dollars. And her question is, which conversion rate will you use? It's up to you. It depends on your policy. You have to have a policy on conversion rate. What rate will you use at the time of withdrawal? What rate will you use at the time you draw down the money and post it to the student account? When you get audited, it's based on your policy as long as you apply it to each and every student. But your policy has to be there. They're going to look for your policy to make sure it's what you apply.
So, Carla, we have about 5 minutes left.
5
Maybe
minutes?
for some questions.
Who has completed? You want to take it home? The answer should be 14,000 is aid amount disbursed. Did you get that? Withdrawal date is 10/25/2017, which is the 50%. So if it's 50%, more than likely, the percentage would also be 50%, right? So 7,000 is unearned. 7,000 needs to be returned. One thing about this is, although it says there, other information, where it says at the end of the semester, the institution discovered that some failed all of his courses. For an institution that is not attendance taking, you have to make sure that your student who have completed all F's is an earned F. But if your student got a B, F, and an F, and an F, you're good. The student attended. What the department doesn't want to see is the student has all F only because the student withdrew and did not complete the payment period, but you gave him an all F and you think it's all earned. I think I got distracted. 7,000. So the student will owe 7,000 that's applied to your student ledger, but 7,000 you need to return, but it's because the student only earned 50% of your tuition charges. So 7,000 needs to be returned. Is that what you guys got? That's what you got? Very good, Jane.
Yeah, but what about the one that's unofficial withdrawal? So this is another case?
Unofficial. Okay, there's two withdrawal. Official is when the student told you that they want to withdraw. Two types of unofficial. One is unofficial from a school that is attendance taking. You actually, last day should be the last day coming from your attendance record. If you're not attendance taking, could be 50%, which is 50% of the payment period.
Yeah, but it says here that it was October 10th. So he attended till October 10th and started September 4th.
The midpoint is yes, because it's 50%. If you are not attendance taking, you don't know when, so you put the midpoint of the payment period, the middle day.
So even if a professor informed that
His last day could be later. For a school that's not attendance taking is either midpoint or the last day of an academic-related activity. If your instructor, academic-related, you can use that date. So which one is better for the student?
What about using a
Okay, I think we better wrap up, folks. I know we got a break coming up in a couple minutes.
Only those
Carla
four
and I
that
will
I
answer
mentioned.
questions as needed.
Yes.
We're going to be at the Ask a Fed booth all week. So if you have specific questions, I'm sorry we cut you a little short today. We'll be happy to answer them at least through Friday. So thank you for attending. I'm also making you aware that there is an online evaluation that will be emailed to you. So I hope we did a good job for you today. Thank you.